Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Hillary Zwallen.
And I'm Amy Schreiber. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries. Hello and welcome to episode number 3, which is our second episode in a 4-part series on intuition.
In this episode, we will hopefully help you to answer the question, what is your intuitive superpower? Or today we're talking about the Clairs, which is Clairvoyance, Clairaudience, Clairsentience, and Claircognizance, and all the misconceptions and preconceived notions and programming around how God, your higher self or spirit, the universe, however you want to refer to it, speaks to you. If you are a person who's been going through a spiritual awakening of sorts, you may already be aware of how these modes of communicating with yourself or your higher power play out in your reality. But if you are thinking, what the heck are the Clairs? We're going to give you some new ways to unlock the secrets of the language of spirit. Doesn't that sound so ominous? The secrets of unlocking the language of spirit. And for understanding what Clair is your strongest. So yes. I wanted to address really quick just our audience so that if you're just tuning in for the first time, you kind of understand who we're targeting and why we're doing this. We're hoping to reach spiritually minded people looking to deepen their practice while either moving away from what you've known, like if you're in a faith transition and you're looking for a different language or a different way to approach your experience, or if you're just starting off on a spiritual path, maybe you've never really spent time pondering this sort of thing, but you're curious and maybe a little bit freaked out, or you're the person that's trying to remain in your religion, but you're also exploring new ways of experiencing your spiritual practice.
Yeah, that's really well said. We aren't trying to tell anyone what to do with this podcast. We're just trying to bring as many tools to the table as possible that drive home the idea that you can tell yourself what to do. So this is kind of about empowerment around making your own choices, having your own ideas, and being on your own personal spiritual path.
Yes. And because these concepts can be grouped into the metaphysics or psychic category, we really want to demystify what all this means. And so because we think that you can apply these ideas to your life for your benefit.
Yeah, I think just before we start, I think the biggest misconception that I wanted to clear up was that these things aren't magic, for one, and they're not exclusive to a lucky few. The Clairs are just styles of receiving intuitive information. They're the avenues that information can travel from our higher selves or the divine into our conscious awareness. So just like you're sitting watching a TV or reading a book or listening to the radio, these are all different ways to receive information. And the ultimate goal is to eventually identify with the source and realize, wait, I am the TV. And there's no separation between us. But until we can make that leap and reach that perspective, the information perceived through the Clairs are kind of the breadcrumbs leading the way to this ultimate realization.
Absolutely. And how we were raised in the Mormon church, but I think there's a similar language within Christianity at large. This is referred to as ways of quote unquote feeling the spirit, or when like a miraculous experience happens, it's referred to as maybe he or she has the gifts of the spirit, or they're very close to the spirit. So we have so our take on this sort of thing is that it's really not, and a lot of times it can be associated with righteousness or like varying degrees of righteousness. I know when I was growing up, I was like, if I just read my scriptures more, then I'll feel closer to God, which I think does help if that's the mode in which to feel close to God. But it's not like a required thing.
Right. As far as having a checklist of requirements that you have to do in order to then qualify to have these types of experiences, that's not right. What we found to be the
So
case.
It's not contingent upon righteousness, but rather contingent upon attention.
Yeah. And then we have all these tools within us, and some are more developed than others. Just you're defining your own language here. Like, you're the only one that can interpret and understand these breadcrumbs for yourself.
I think it's kind of like dancing. I used to teach dance, and I had a various degrees of talent that I was working with. And I really maintained throughout my practice that anyone can learn how to dance. Not everyone is going to pick it up in 2 seconds and look amazing. They might look really awkward, but they're going to be able to learn steps. So I think it's like anything else. It's like playing basketball. It's like some people are naturally really in tune and the volume's turned up, and other people, maybe you just haven't discovered what avenue is where your talent lies, but we all have it. So whether you're good at dance or basketball, you know. So yes, and these don't have to be miraculous spiritual experiences. They can happen in much more ordinary ways, kind of your day-to-day stuff.
Right. And so our quote of the day for this is from Henry Poincaré, and he said, "It is through science that we prove, but through intuition that we discover."
And with that, let us discover clairvoyance. So I'll take us into clairvoyance. It means clear seeing. I know when I was younger, and even really before this whole thing, I thought that clairvoyance meant that you could see the future. And I used to think that was really scary, and that, you know, as if the future is written, that you can go to someone and they can tell you what's going to happen to you. And while I do think there are really good energy readers out there, and there's people that can give you good readings, the future it's not written, right? And the real meaning behind clairvoyance is just the way in which you are interpreting your spiritual promptings. Or so the way you can kind of tell if you're clairvoyant is do you see symbols or vignettes that play out in your mind's eye? It's easier. Is it easier to describe the images you're seeing in your head than to find the words to articulate the message? So if you're one that finds yourself in elaborate scenes in your head, clairvoyance might be your quote unquote superpower of sorts. So, and these all happen in your mind's eye, or what they refer to in yoga as your third eye. And your third eye is right in between the center of it's like right in between your eyebrows, just above the center of, like right in the center of your forehead. And this is there's actually a chakra associated with it, but it's kind of where things materialize. I know for myself, I have found that the clear seeing is really a big part of how I interpret my world around me. And I find that I often end up looking somewhat like kind of to the left, and it feels like I'm watching a screen in my mind. So I definitely notice that for me to feel like I'm getting some sort of a inspiration on a visual level, it's a little bit different than just kind of existing in my regular world. I'm definitely up in my head. I'm off to the left. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. Does that happen for you? No?
No, not like the directionally, like in my head to the left. That's interesting that you have a location that like you visualize this in.
Yeah, I always feel like it's just it's off to the left, and I find that whenever I look over to the left, I'm like, I can tell now. I think I just used to naturally do it, but now because I've brought an awareness to it, I'll notice that if I'm starting to kind of call my attention away from the eyes of who I'm talking to, and I'm going back into my head, or I'm really getting into a creative mode, that's where it occurs for me. So super highly visual people, we're able to understand ideas best when we can see it written or sketched out as an image, or on a computer screen, or on a canvas. I find it really helps me when I'm working in a group to just be able to sit down and kind of sketch it out. If we're coming up with like a game plan or something creative that we want to execute, it's really hard for me to be kind of off and just doing like, I mean, I'm a talker too, but I find that the images are stronger than the words for me. So
in school, were you like way easier for you to focus if there was PowerPoint slides with pictures versus just a straight lecture talking?
Absolutely. Yes. And also, but yeah, 100%. If I could see it if I could watch it play out, it was stuck in my mind. If I had to read it out of a book, I had to read it like 2 or 3 times to really get it in there. So understanding that when you get these visual, and we'll just call them hits for yourself, that there's something greater. And so that's kind of the hard part, is just determining what's just like a silly daydream and what is getting you into the creative flow, right? Or that connection with the higher self. And I found this to be the case when I was very first opening up and really getting into meditation. Oftentimes I would close my eyes and the images I would see would be choreography, because I was a dancer, and I would just visually just like watch movement play out in front of my mind's eye. And I was just like, oh, this is interesting. Like, this is interesting that this is where my mind goes when I want to be creative, or when I'm trying to it doesn't do that as much anymore. Like, now I can just kind of breathe and go quickly into my meditative state. But in the beginning, I thought it was interesting that the spiritual language that was occurring for me was something that I was naturally passionate and interested in. So to just notice that, I think these things really follow our interests, and there's a reason why, we're interested in the things
we know.
Exactly. So yes, and visual people often, like clairvoyant people, or people that tend to have that visual creative insight, choose to be artists, builders, photographers, designers, actors, and so forth. So if this sounds familiar, clairvoyance is most likely your dominant sense.
Yeah. Is there like an example that you can think of, just like specifically to give more context of like what specifically this has felt like in a situation?
So I have one. In fact, clairvoyance. I had a coaching session yesterday, and the coach that I was working with, it's through this leadership program that I'm in, and he had asked me to explain something, or to find words to describe my feelings about like this situation that I felt was stopping me. And I couldn't find the words, and I was like, wait, let me just, because, we're talking on the phone. And so I was like, I'm just kind of letting the image come to my mind, and I'll just describe the image, because I found that when I would try to explain my feelings, where normally, I'm a pretty decent explainer of feelings, but I felt like it made a lot. I said, let me just explain the images that are coming to mind. And so when I was able to describe the images to him, the point was deeper and way more meaningful to me. And we were both like, oh, wow, look at that. And look at how it all connects. So I felt like, okay, the language of the universe is symbolic. And that was a perfect example of clairvoyance kind of popping in to help me to understand my earthly experience in this moment. So yeah. What about you, Amy? Is there anything that is there like a clairvoyant experience you can think of for yourself?
Well, the first time, like, clairvoyance is not my most dominant sense, but the first time that I really noticed and tried to explore it was after I went to the library and I found this random little book on shamanism. So I was reading it, and it was describing what is called a shamanic journey into the lower world, which, based on my understanding, is like the unconscious.
Yeah, the subconscious.
So what you do is you have you listen to drums while your eyes are closed and you're relaxed, and then you, in your mind's eye, try to go down some place in the earth, some hole in the bottom of a tree, some bottom of a lake, and you just keep walking down and down and down until you come to a door. And then you step through the door, and when you're through the door, that's when you're in the lower world, and you just kind of look around. And so I was like, that sounds fun, I'll try that. And so I tried it, and I opened this door in my mind. I'm in this meditative state, and it was just the most like amazing, fantastical world down there. I was seeing all sorts of just these creatures, these animals, talking to them. And so like just that visual, realizing kind of that like my inner world was more like rich and interesting than I realized it was. Like, it was definitely different than my normal waking imaginations.
Right.
And that's what kind of stopped me. And I was like, oh wow, there's more here than I realized. And like, it can come in these visuals. Like, it was really interesting.
Well, and it's all symbolic, right? So it's really important if you are in the lower world to kind of notice the state is it a desert? Is it a jungle? And, you know, and to ponder, well, what does that mean? Why is it so fertile down here? Why is it so dead? Why is it so dark? Why is it so light? And all of those things.
Right.
So it's interesting. I always think that brings it back to that symbolic nature of that realm work. If you want to move into the higher places, that's really cool.
Because you get this set of symbols, and then you interpret them. Like that's the task.
And you get to be the interpreter.
It's like a dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that was a cool clairvoyant example. Do you want to move us into clairaudience? Since that's your kind of dominant sense.
Yeah, clairaudience. I'm more clairaudient than anything else. Clairaudience means clear hearing. So this is when you're hearing words, sounds, or music in your mind or your inner ear. I guess we could maybe call it your third ear. I don't know if that's
Let's coin
real.
that term. Yes.
Yeah. So these are like your auditory learners, and these people often get involved with music, writing, or speaking. Like these are very language-oriented people. And I've been kind of it's been interesting since being in Mexico and learning Spanish, the different ways you translate your experience into words. Like different languages encourage different thought processes. Like in Spanish, you say, I have hunger, I have a feeling, I have an age, versus I am hungry, or I am angry, I am, 30. So a huge, and I thought this was so kind of crazy because a huge part of spiritual health for me has been trying to learn and understand that I am not my body, I am not my feelings, I am not all these things, I'm not my thoughts. These are just things that I have, It's not me.
Yeah.
These are just temporary states. So this seems to just be automatically understood in Spanish because it's built into the language.
Right.
Automatically. So
right.
So yeah, I thought that was really
that's a really cool insight. It's totally true to think that in English we're set up to literally identify with everything as ourselves in our language. It's in our language. Wow.
Yeah. It's not our fault.
Yeah.
It's just,
blame the people
language.
that came up with this language. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So how does this manifest for you?
It's mostly manifests as inner conversations with whether it's just me talking to myself, me addressing an animal in my mind or some sort of guide, or sometimes my deceased grandparents. But I have heard audible voices and music before, not very often. And then like these inner conversations, whether or not these are actual conversations with external beings coming from elsewhere, or just an inner dialogue with these characters that I'm creating out of my subconscious mind. Mm-hmm. That doesn't, like, I think about that sometimes, and I don't think that matters to me because the conversations are helpful. Like they have value in my unraveling of my experience.
Right.
So that's something to think about. Like when you encounter these things, hung up on, do I want to take this literally? Like, what does it mean if I take it literally? Like, just kind of something to think about there. Decide maybe, is this literal, but like, does this have value?
Right. More than just like, is this really happening?
Thought process.
I hear you.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, that it's not just, I mean, you can, whether it's literal or not is irrelevant. I mean, it's the idea is that this is how it manifested for you, for your benefit.
Right. And yeah, another way that it manifests too is just sometimes when I'm meditating, I can sense this shift in the ambient noise around me. Mm-hmm. The best way I can describe it is that the air just starts to sound really thick all of a sudden. And that's not all the time. That's just every once in a while, but it just sounds really thick and full, but it's not particular things.
I've totally had that
overall
experience. I find, especially, I lead these sound healings, and I find that after that, it's like an hour of crystal bowls and tuning forks and drums. And so it's a lot of sound. And at the end, when it's really quiet, it just feels like the air is so thick. So that's an interesting point that you brought up. I find that is the same for me. Shall we move to claircognizance?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so claircognizance is a clear knowing, and it's having a knowledge of people or events that we normally wouldn't have knowledge about, but we just somehow things pop into our head. Sometimes this is like a warning or a premonition. And this is one side of it that I wanted to bring up, that, you know, we're talking about kind of like the rainbows and butterflies part of intuition, but there's also the very real biological built-in, warning mechanism of intuition that really helps us to ping when we shouldn't be in a certain situation, or we just get that sinking feeling where we know something has happened and we need to either mobilize and find out what to do or get the heck out of wherever we are. So with claircognizance, this is where simple truths or knowledge of a situation that just kind of pop into our mind out of nowhere. And so it can be, like I just mentioned, a premonition, but it also can be, it can require a lot of faith. And I think claircognizance seems to be, when I'm talking to people, it seems like claircognizance is one of the more common. I would say I don't know, who knows if it's more common than clairvoyance and stuff, but most people aren't walking around like, I'm seeing all these images in my mind's eye. Like, I talk like that, but, and there's some people that talk like that with me, but I feel like most people are like, I just knew deep inside, because we're more comfortable with those feelings in our bodies because of the warning mechanism. That's my theory of it anyway. So it can require a lot of faith in what you're getting, because there's oftentimes not a lot of practical explanation for why we suddenly know something. This is something that I see in really cerebral people, like philosophers, professors, doctors, scientists. These are people that are like, I'm not going to sit in my creative world. I'm dealing with facts and figures. And so, these are business leaders that tend to be intuitive. These people are intuitive. I would imagine doctors, especially, that when there's life or death situations, they're really operating off of instinct and obviously skill. But there's also that other component of that inner wisdom that's calling the shots sometimes. But they tend to be highly intuitive and just know the facts with a sense of certainty. So that's something to consider if you're thinking, well, yeah, that might be me, claircognizance.
Yeah, well, that's like Albert Einstein would talk about all the time, how he would, these things and equations would come to him in his dreams, and he knew that they were true, but he had to work through and rationally prove them after the fact. But it was after, they had just come to him. He just knew them. Right.
It just came in where did this come from? I just hooked into the universe and I just downloaded straight to my brain. Yeah. I think this reminds me of, I used to call this getting into the flow. Right. And sometimes when you get started on a new path in your life, you just get flashes of intuition of the path you're supposed to be on. And I find this to be the case, in my own life for sure, and I'm sure with other people too, but just as you start to move down the path, things start to happen faster, and that inner wisdom starts to really move and jive. And I noticed this when I first started really contemplating. I feel like I was in my 20s when I started to notice that I was like, hey, am I intuitive? Is this more than just normal? Am I getting hits for other people? Am I, those kinds of things, noticing that. But then it kind of went dormant when I had kids, because it was you're just doing diapers and you're trying to function. Yeah. But when I started White Plum, which was our clothing company that we used to own, I felt like once the business got rolling, it was one of those, I always instinctively kind of knew what to do. And when I look back on the experience, I had no experience in clothing, and we just kind of barreled in there and figured it out. And part of it's hard work and hustle, but I really felt like there were certain times in the business where it was I don't know why I chose to go that way, or why I chose to buy that much product or take that risk, but it was just an inner knowing. It was I felt oh my gosh, I'm in the flow here. And not that I knew better or more than any of our competitors, but it was more for me a personal, like a self-discovery about how to harness that creative power, and how when you hyper focus and you're kind of in that flow, that things show up. So the universe kind of conspires to help you ask the empowered questions of yourself, and it always answers with the language of your individual soul. So anyway, I hope that example makes sense.
I think that's true. No, it does. And I think that also makes sense going the other way too. Like if you are headed down a path that is absolutely wrong, you're also going to get like a lot of flashes of knowing and
fear,
fear signs that you can interpret as like, if you were to stop and think for a second, like this is not the way. Like this isn't where we're supposed to be going right now. But and that kind of goes along with clairsentience too, which is our next Clair, and it means clear feeling. So this is high sensitivity to the emotions or physical sensations for yourself or others. And these people are called empaths often, or highly sensitive people, the HSPs. So these are the strong gut feelings that you feel when, like, you just have that sinking feeling in your stomach, or you have the chills. You know, these are like how our higher self is speaking to us, and it's manifesting in our physical sensations, our tactile sensations. And so a lot of people who have this as a dominant sense are caregivers, healers, therapists, teachers. This is like people who are super empathetic to the feelings of others. And these people get attracted to them, that kind of like the energy vampire types.
Yes. So these people are highly in tune with others' feelings as well. And so they're walking around picking up info and maybe carrying stuff for other people. You know, I'll take that pain from you and I'll just put it on my backpack and I'll just carry it around. Right.
Yeah. Boundaries become very important for these people, and like really purposeful self-care, so that they don't get caught up making themselves sick or neglected out of like absorbing everyone else's stuff. For me, I experience clairsentience as either that familiar, I think everyone knows that feeling in your solar plexus. But for me, it also, I've always experienced kind of digestive issues. And your digestive system has so many neurotransmitters in it. It's been called the second brain. So I've been kind of in an ongoing struggle to kind of understand and honor the signs that my body is giving me through my digestive upsets. And then it also, it can be anywhere in your body too. Like lately, the last couple months, I've been experiencing a physical tightness around my throat. Like there's nothing there. Like, but it feels like my shirt is like around my throat, and I go to pull it down, but there's nothing there.
Wow.
I was like, that's weird. And that's probably like having to do with confronting my blocks around communicating with this podcast.
Yes.
So,
I can relate to that. Yeah. I feel like when I started to notice, I mean, I've always thought, well, I definitely feel other people's energy. And I noticed that when I was teaching dance in LA, and I knew nothing about energetic boundaries, and I knew nothing about kind of like creating those mental boundaries before you walk into situations where you're going to be dealing with people all day. And I was just constantly so exhausted, and obviously I was dancing, but it was like a deeper exhaustion. And then I started this shamanic training. I'm halfway through my shamanic practitioner training. And so when I'm working with my teacher, Danielle, I just noticed that when we were working with clients, I flew back to do some sessions with her and some training. And we just had a day or 2 days where we just saw clients all day long. And every time someone would sit on the table, I would instantly feel like whatever they were feeling. Like someone came in and they were kind of nauseated, and I was instantly nauseous. And I was like, asking her, like, what do I do with this? Like, and, you know, so I'll feel when people need to breathe. When I'm in a space where I'm in a healing space, I found that, you know, she's trying to help me to bring it up to my clairvoyance rather than having it in my body, because it can be a hard place to be when you start to get what other people are feeling literally. And it's not like that happens to me all the time, but I noticed in this training that was something where, gosh, I was so tuned into what these other people were experiencing that I was like experiencing it and to a degree for myself. And you know, I don't know what to make of that, but it's something that I'm currently working on improving my energetic boundaries for that reason.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a whole episode on that and self-care. That's an important piece.
Yes. We're just about done for today. We knocked this out pretty quick. I just wanted to take a quick minute and say how grateful I am for how generous our listeners have been. This is our episode 3, but we launched our first 2 at the same time last week, and it was so scary and so nice to hear from so many people. So we really appreciate, for those of you that are continuing on this journey with us, we really appreciate the support and the kindness that we've received. So this is just the beginning. But we've been really grateful.
Yes, thank you. If you, on that note, it would mean a lot to us if you could take a moment to leave a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening on. We really want feedback so we can continue to improve our show. We're just starting out, and I know we'll probably be like embarrassed of these first couple episodes, you know, a year from now. But we just would like your help as listeners to give us ideas and give us some constructive feedback.
Yes. And now that you know about the Clairs and are taking an inquiry as to how you receive divinely guided answers, in our next episode, we'll be giving you all the tools and ways in which you can harness your intuitive capabilities. So we hope you'll tune in next week.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.